they allegedly blocked GOP fundraising emails from reaching the inboxes of donors. Like, that has to be a crime.
Now we have the element of having to worry about the impact of cyber attacks and AI, especially when it comes to the upcoming elections. Even Democrats in Congress are sounding the alarm.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, happy Friday. So we have what I think is going to be a really fun episode today because it reveals a lot of information just on how unjust things are and, you know, all the censorship that's been happening and all of the crazy things throughout the last 8 years that we've questioned. We're going to shine a light on a lot of it, and it's going to start to make sense. This is like a missing puzzle piece, I feel like, that we've just found. So I think we mentioned on another episode how some evidence has come forth that showed Google interfering in elections for the past 16 years. But I found some more on this. And again, it's like really helped me understand why so many people hate Trump, like literally hate the guy. So I can't wait to talk about all this because this has been like something I've wondered about for a long time. So people have literally been conditioned to believe completely false stories and stories that have later been proven false without any apology or correction by mainstream media outlets. And we know this, right? And so during the Haiti episode that we did, I played a clip from CIA whistleblower John Stockwell, and that was from a 1983 interview. I want to play another clip from that interview that explains how the CIA plants propaganda into the news outlets. So listen to this.
Is this sort of thing practiced in Vietnam?
Oh, endlessly a massive propaganda effort in Vietnam in the 50s and in the 60s, including the 1,000 books that were published, several hundred in English, that were also propaganda books, sponsored by the CIA. Give some money to a writer, write this book for us, write anything you want, but on these matters, make sure, you have this line.
Writers in this country, books sold and distributed in this country?
Sure, yeah. English language books, meaning an American audience as a target, on the subject of Vietnam and the history of Vietnam and the history of Marxism and supporting the domino theory, etc.
Without opening us up to a lawsuit, could you name one of them?
No, I could not. But the church committee, when they found this out, demanded that they be given the titles so that the university libraries could at least go and stamp inside the Central Intelligence Agency's version of history. And the CIA refused because it's been commissioned to protect its sources and methods, and the sources would be the authors who wrote these false propaganda books, some of whom are now distinguished scholars and journalists.
Doesn't the CIA flatly deny? They've admitted that there is some propaganda efforts, but their position is that those are all outside the United States, not in the United States. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. When we were running this Angolan operation and pumping these stories into the world and U.S. press, exactly that time, Bill Colby, the CIA director, was testifying to Congress, assuring them that we were extremely careful to make sure that none of our propaganda spilled back into the United States. And the very days that he was giving this false testimony, we were planting stories in the Washington Post. By that, I mean not through the soccer, but we actually flew a journalist from Paris to Washington to plant a false story. I mentioned it. I give the text of the story in my book.
So you planted a story in the Washington Post by bringing a man from abroad. You had no difficulty, got right past the editor with it?
Yeah.
Is this common? Is it easy?
It's easier than you would think. Yes, yes. If it's on the line of, for example, if it's on the line of Grenada being radical today, we've had articles in the Washington Post, the Star before it closed, Time magazine, that could only have been written originally by the CIA, Soviet submarine base, terrorist training. Here's a little island where the major source of income is selling spice to the West, Western tourism, and a large United States medical school. Tiny little island, 15 miles by 10 miles across, with 70,000 people, with U.S. medical students in their cutaways and sandals and their noses in books wandering all over the island. And yet, major press organs, Time magazine, running stories about their being so radical.
So I think that's so interesting. Like, Here he's talking about an island that's mostly US college students that are just like going to school, hanging out at the beach, and they were able to paint them as complete radicals, like this whole island, like, oh, it's radical terrorists. And it makes me wonder a lot about, things we've heard in history, right?
Especially since we're hearing about this before the internet exploded.
Yep.
So he's talking about writing books, and how much easier is it to do that today with spreading propaganda than it was? I mean, what was that interview? 1983, you said?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was talking about, they had books, newspapers, and the nightly news. And
Yeah.
they planted propaganda and fake stories in all three of those. But like you said, we have the internet, podcasts, blogs, social media, and now AI. Like it's easier than ever for them to plant all kinds of crazy things. And you better believe they are. I mean, why would they not? Why would they go to all that trouble to like fly authors and journalists all over the world to plant fake stories? But then they're not going to go online and do it now. Like, of course they are. Come on,
Right.
like it's right there. And there are big stories we all know about that were propaganda. So we have the Russia collusion hoax that the media and the Democrats talked about for years as complete fact, right? And anything against it was disinformation. Now we know for certain that Hillary Clinton paid for that fake dossier, and one of her attorneys was charged with this. And then you have the 100 signatures from top positions of our government saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Well, now we know for certain it really was his laptop. And once again, Russia had nothing to even do with it. We know for certain that the media and organizations like the CDC and social media companies all work together to censor information around COVID. And they didn't just hide real treatments that work, they outright lied and said that those treatments were dangerous so that they could instead push a vaccine that we now know has serious side effects. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like those are obvious stories that kind of woke us all up to the complete lies. And the Twitter files, woke us up to our government colluding with big tech to censor, ban, and go after American citizens on the right. But I want to take it a step further in today's episode and explain the subtle ways in which the government is allegedly brainwashing its citizens to deeply hate and fear Donald Trump, because I'm so freaking fascinated by this phenomenon. Like we have people that are smart, educated, kind-hearted people that turn red with hatred at the mere mention of Trump's name. And there's even a condition that's been named the Trump Derangement Syndrome that explains this strange, visceral reaction that people have to Trump, yet they can't explain why, because it's purely emotional. And it's not their fault. Like they have literally been brainwashed to think this. And it's actually a lot easier to do this than you might think. So it's called classical conditioning. You've probably heard about it at some point in time if you ever took a Psych 101 class, but it's where your subconscious hears something enough times and it starts to believe it as truth, regardless of evidence of the contrary. So like that's why I love subliminals and affirmations for like your money mindset, for example. Even if you're dirt poor, you tell yourself you're rich enough times, you'll come to believe it. And when you believe it, you'll take drastic action to align your life with it. So just like the left, the media and the government officials are taking drastic action to prevent Trump from getting back into the Oval Office, they're, spreading all of these lies over and over and over again, knowing that people will just come to accept it as truth. So now that we have like that basic foundation for propaganda and brainwashing and how it all works, I want to dive into the new information that we have on Google interfering in elections. So this is from a special report by the MRC that details 41 times Google has interfered in elections in the past 16 years. And this is a robust report. So if you have some time, maybe on spring break, go and read it. Just search the MRC report on Google and you'll see it. But I'm just going to go over the highlights. So it starts in 2008, where Hillary Clinton bloggers were censored and Obama was favored by Google's algorithm. Well, wouldn't you know that once Obama became president, Google executives became White House advisors? In fact, The Intercept tabulated 55 cases where Google employees went to work for the White House and 197 cases where people moved from the government to Google. And Google staffers had also gathered at the White House a whopping 427 times between 2009 and 2015 when Obama was president. And it's funny because I remember when I first heard about Obama running and like no one had heard of him. He was like a no name, like no one recognized him. I'm from Chicago and I still like had no clue who this guy was. Well, now we know how he got so far so fast. And the Morning Wire podcast actually went over some of the details from this report over things that have happened in the past few years that really helped to push the most progressive candidates to win elections while censoring their competition. So in 2012, they used what's called a Google bomb to smear Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum by associating his name with undesirable search results. So if you typed his name, you would see search results come up for like negative things and sometimes like really obscene things. And so people would associate his name with unfavorable things. Well, I guess the same thing had happened at some point to Obama, and Google fixed it right away, but they refused to fix it for Santorum. And the impact of Google's search algorithm was to sway people towards the left. And it makes sense as to like why there's all these court cases against Trump, because they know that now, whenever somebody searches Trump's name, you're going to see all of these articles about him being indicted, about him being a criminal. So again, people, it's that classical conditioning where people will just believe it, even though there's really no truth to it. And this is like so crazy. So you can actually go and find this like full video. But a top Google executive, Jen Janai, told an undercover journalist in 2019, quote, "We're also training our algorithms. So if 2016 happened again, would the outcome be different?" End quote. And she talked about it being Google's duty to, quote, "prevent another Trump situation." So they're flat out training their algorithm to make sure that Trump doesn't get reelected. How is that not election interference?
Yeah, that sounds like a line straight out of the Gestapo playbook to me. And while you were talking about Obama, I just started thinking, because you're right, I didn't hear his name much until he was being pushed as a candidate. And I was thinking, I bet if Ramaswamy had been left leaning, they would have done the same fucking thing with him because he
Yeah.
has that appeal. Like, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but Biden has no appeal. Trump only appeals to a certain set of people, and they haven't had a good, strong, young candidate really since Obama. And I was just like, oh my God, if he had been for the left, I bet they would have pushed him the way they did with Obama and the media.
And maybe they were. Like a lot of people still question him, Vivek, on
Mhm.
where, you know, his loyalty really is just because of the whole World Economic Forum global leader thing. We could do a whole episode on this, but like Obama was like raised for this. He was raised with the Bushes. He is
Yeah.
George W's first cousin. A lot of people don't realize that. Like he is in it. And George Sr. was head of the CIA. Like it's so twisted. I mean, these people have their hands in everything. And so when you look at like more recent things from this report, there's details that include in 2020 how Google censored Tulsi Gabbard by disabling her ad account just as she became the most searched candidate. Google also censored negative news articles on Biden and then they allegedly blocked GOP fundraising emails from reaching the inboxes of donors. Like that has to be a crime.
Yeah.
And Google search results and get out the vote reminders favored Democrats and shifted election results away from Trump and the GOP by 6 million votes, according to the
Oh,
report. That's
wow.
insane.
Yeah.
And Tara, like, remember in 2022 when everyone was predicting a red wave in the Senate and the House, and then it didn't happen? We were like, what the fuck? Like, what happened there? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Google hid Republican candidates' campaign websites for 12 competitive Senate seats. They were hiding them. And like 61% of the news stories on Google's homepage were left leaning, while only 3% were right leaning. And now in 2024, they're burying the sites of Biden's competitors, including all Republican candidates, as well as RFK Jr. The report also noticed that when you search Republican presidential candidate websites, um, the results show Marianne Williamson, who is a Democrat candidate. Like, why would that pop up? And then the report highlights that the number of votes shifted to Democrats was 2.6 million in 2016 and 6 million in 2020, which is a 140% increase. So just like that uh, Google executive that was telling the undercover journalist that, how can we make sure 2016 doesn't happen again? Well, here is the analytics behind it. Like, they made damn well sure that they swayed more voters. And that is the power of these algorithms and search results. And just speaking from experience, like, we always try to find articles to back up our podcast topics. And I can say with 100% certainty, they are always left-leaning results. In fact, the only time I don't get left-leaning news is when I go directly to the website of like Fox News or the New York Post or Epic Times. So the recommendations in this report is they're asking Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, to direct the appropriate committees to investigate Google for abridging people's constitutional rights, for coordinating with the government to violate the freedom of speech, for interfering in elections, and for defrauding users by violating its own terms of service. And the report encourages state legislatures to follow the lead that Texas and Florida took in ensuring that big tech does not engage in viewpoint discrimination. And then last, they encourage people not to use Google and instead use search engines and products that aren't completely biased.
Yeah, you know what? It's great that they're asking Mike Johnson to investigate, but come on, how many fucking investigations is the House doing right now into all this shit that's going nowhere? Like, how
Yeah.
many?
The investigations like literally don't matter. It's a theater
No.
performance because the DOJ is never going to prosecute it because they're tied into it. It's like asking you to prosecute yourself. Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there is the evidence that you just cited is 100% damning legitimate evidence. It's clear election fraud. It's clear fucking fraud. Are they going to do anything with it? My guess is not. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. When you were talking about using other search engines, like I use DuckDuckGo a lot. I don't know if you ever use that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the biggest part of the problem is like the level of social media and internet content that's controlled by Google, especially in today's day and age where everyone has businesses that are run by the internet and by apps. And like, not only is Google the number one search engine in the world, it owns YouTube, it owns Waze, it owns Gmail, every app on the Google Play Store for people who use Android. And I mean, Stephanie, where do we put our notes for this podcast? In the fucking Google Drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so choose Apple. Like, is that any better? Not really. I was reading an article in The Blaze, and there was this guy who created an app called Wimkin Social Media, and this was back in September of 2020. And at the time, it was supposed to be like a free speech alternative to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But a few months later, by January of 2021, his app was banned and deplatformed by both Apple and Google. And the reason was supposedly for facilitating the January 6th insurrection by telling the truth. And I guess that once an app is banned on Apple, like you're fucked. The article said, unless you're like a super tech savvy person when it comes to jailbreaking, to like sideload a banned app onto an iOS device, which like that whole thing goes over my head. Like me, the average person isn't going to be able to get the app back on their phone. And The article said, quote, Apple can cripple any company by deplatforming its app and removing it from every iOS device active in the world overnight. One day your app can be accessed on the billion plus iPhones in the world, and the next day it can't, end quote. And then I guess even with Google Play, they issue a warning if you try to download an app that's not in the Google Play Store, and they say, like, this file may harm your device. So most people aren't going to take that risk and they reject the download. And that's happened to me before, where I've gone to download something and I've gotten that kind of warning, so I don't end up doing it. So basically, what we have here is like Apple and Google Play, which control every single app pretty much. They have like totalitarian control over what we can access. So let's say you even create an app. If they don't want to accept it because it has more conservative leaning content on their platforms, they can do it and not take your app. And if they want to fuck you for not going along with the narrative, they can take away apps and access to things you already have. I mean, it's legitimate, plain and clear censorship.
Yeah. Well, and Google owns YouTube. And look at how
Yeah.
many videos of ours that have been taken down because there's like something in there they don't like. It's totally an unfair advantage. I mean, they really can make or break a company. And funny enough, I feel like the only place that's not totally biased on the internet where you actually see both sides is TikTok. And it's like, no wonder they want to ban it. A lot more people are looking to TikTok for information than searching Google. And I think TikTok has like opened the eyes of so much corruption. And, I just wonder though, like, is that going to be enough for Trump to win the election when you have every other social media company and search engine like actively working against him?
Yeah. Like, not if Congress is successful in getting rid of TikTok, which, by the way, you guys might be surprised because we haven't really been talking about this. And TikTok is our main social media platform, but we've kind of been waiting to see how the Senate votes. But the bottom line is like this push to ban TikTok honestly has nothing to do with China. It has everything to do with censoring free speech. And if this ban is successful, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the elections this year. And my question is like, how are people not understanding the significance of censoring free speech? Like the idiots that want to censor Trump have no fucking clue that they're pushing for a totalitarian state. Like, I don't like listening to Biden or Kamala or fucking KJP. But if the tables were turned and Trump was the one in office and these talking heads weren't controlling the narrative with their lies, I still wouldn't be in favor of them being censored. You don't like what they have to say? Don't fucking listen. Change the channel, put on something else. Like, this is a very dangerous game that the citizens have been allowing the government and the media to play. And people are just too invested in their hurt feelings and their inability to see the big picture that they don't get how scary this shit is. And now, instead of just like these algorithms on the internet and banning social media apps, now we have the element of having to worry about the impact of cyber attacks and AI, especially when it comes to the upcoming elections. Even Democrats in Congress are sounding the alarm. I was reading in the Washington Times that the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Mark Warner, he was saying that America's less prepared to deal with cyber chaos targeting our upcoming elections under Biden than they were under Trump. And he made this statement during a threat summit on Tuesday. And he said, quote, this is hard for me to say since I'm a Democrat and we're under a Democrat president, end quote. And according to this article, he said that foreign countries have discovered that, meddling is inexpensive and easy when it comes to election interference. And voters are way more distrustful than they were 4 years ago. The federal government's information sharing with social media platforms has decreased, probably because of all these fucking lawsuits. But personally, I think it's a good thing that the federal government is not able to share as much information because all they share is nonsense and lies anyway. But Warner made similar statements during a different cybersecurity summit in February. And he said, quote, the kind of manipulation that was going to take place in 2016 looks like child's play at this point. AI can do this at a scale and speed that's unprecedented, end quote. And so, Stephanie, we've talked about this before. Over 50 countries are having major elections this year. I was reading an article in the Telegraph that said it's 76 countries. It's more than any year on record, and more than 4 billion people are expected to vote in these national elections around the globe. Like, this is truly a historical year that has the potential to completely shift global politics, not just the United States. So, obviously, AI election interference isn't just a threat to America, it has the potential to sway elections throughout the world. And again, to me, this is really fucking scary, especially because we have, and I'm seeing it here a lot in Europe. You have all these countries that seem to be worried about the negative impacts of Trump getting elected and then him changing the trajectory of global politics by changing US foreign policy. So clearly, Trump derangement syndrome is not just a concern for domestic voters because the entire world has been brainwashed to believe that he's a bad man. And I was reading this article in Parliament magazine, definitely a left-leaning point of view, because the author was interviewing the deputy vice president of global research at the International Center for Journalists. And she compared Trump to a quote, strongman dictator, end quote, and of course called him a threat to democracy. But if you take away the whole threat to democracy agenda, she had very valid points about the capabilities of AI and how it can produce information like super quick and super cheap, and when it's deployed with an algorithm, like how you just talked about what Google's been doing for years, it has the potential to be explosive. She said, quote, disinformation narratives have a powerful impact on voting intentions. The problem has been supercharged by algorithmic distribution of political conspiracy theories and disinformation or harmful content, whether it's from foreign state actors or particular stakeholders in the political process within a country. But now we have this really significant fuel on the fire from generative AI technology, which means you can confound the voting public more quickly and potentially with worse impact. The big threat here is that when nobody knows what or who to believe or who to trust anymore, many people choose not to believe anything at all, end quote. And that to me is one of the scariest things, is the people who are just going to like not participate in voting. And I get it because like she's right on. AI has the capability to completely create these totally believable deep fakes. There's going to be a lot of shit happening this year for the purpose of intentionally influencing or interfering with elections around the world. Like AI is going to play a huge role that could potentially completely change global politics. And that's when people don't know what to believe anymore. Like, that's when we're really fucked.
Yeah, and all of the companies that are creating AI are, it's no like secret, they are left leaning. I mean, we
Yeah.
looked already at like the bias from that AI Gemini thing, and it's like totally, they're trained to be completely like not just left, but like progressive left. And that's a terrifying thought.
Yeah, and here's what else I find terrifying. So the Prime Minister of the UK is leading this global initiative to create like this pact between governments of nations around the world with the goal of countering the deceptive use of AI by foreign states. And he's was listing like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. But here's my question. Is this effort really countering deceptive AI, or is it a mass global misinformation, disinformation propaganda campaign to control the elections like everywhere by having this global control over the narrative and censoring what they don't want us to know? Because even as we speak, the UN is voting on a worldwide AI resolution. And who's sponsoring it? The fucking United States. And their aim is to have all of the 193 countries that are UN member nations have consensus on what this is going to be. And we've talked at length about how corrupt the UN is. Like, do you really think this is just about the safety and trustworthiness of AI and getting countries to agree on global regulations? Because my conspiracy brain thinks it's much bigger than this, and that it's a huge key to the plan for global censorship and control.
Oh, absolutely. And the crazy thing is that I realized is that it's not just the big things that they're censoring, like the Hunter Biden laptop, like the very obvious things. There's so many like little subtle things that they've purposely been feeding us, especially with regards to painting Trump in a negative light. So like for example, When Biden decided to spend last Christmas on vacation instead of with the troops, which is customary for presidents, the media left him alone. Let's compare that to how they treated Trump. Like in 2018, NBC falsely reported, quote, Trump becomes first president since 2002 to skip visiting the troops. But that was a total lie. Like he visited soldiers in Iraq on Christmas Day. The same thing happened on Thanksgiving when Newsweek said that he was spending the holiday golfing instead of spending it with the troops, but he really was with the troops in Afghanistan. Like he was actually the first US president to visit combat troops on both holidays in a war zone. And then, the media also perpetuated the lie that Trump was like against the LGBTQ community. And literally, I guarantee everyone in that community thinks that Trump is like a bigot and hates them. When the facts, the reality was that he was actually the first president in history that came into the office outright supporting gay marriage. Like, not even Obama supported this until his second term. And then Trump is also the first president to work at decriminalizing homosexuality in countries where it's still illegal. But of course, like we never hear about these things. It's just, automatically assumed that he's like some kind of like homophobe or something. And the big lie that he's like this racist, that's another thing. And it's so subtle. It's like these little subtle hints that they drop that he's just this big racist who like refuses to denounce white supremacy. Well, the reality is there's actually 23 times documented on video while he was president where he denounced white supremacy, but they won't report on it or talk about it. Or how about the fact that he was friends with like all these Black people prior to becoming president, including Oprah and Jesse Jackson? Or like when Mar-a-Lago, that was the first club in South Florida that allowed minorities inside. And he actually won an award for that, like right alongside Rosa Parks. Yet all of this stuff is suppressed and they just keep pushing these little, little things like in every segment about how he is like this crazy racist. And we know that they took multiple clips of Trump and tried to make it look like he was making fun of a mentally disabled person when he never was. And now we have the media going crazy saying that where he said it's going to be a bloodbath. And they're trying to make it sound like he said that like in the context of him losing the election when he was actually referring to the auto industry. And like all the news outlets that are taking issue with the word bloodbath have used that same word multiple times. And Trump actually posted a compilation video of this to prove a point. And I have it. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
.com reports tonight on the, quote, bloodbath at the RNC. Headlines calling it a, quote, bloodbath. A bloodbath. Not only is it going to be a bloodbath, but after they leave New Hampshire, it's a bloodbath on her home turf. That's really tough. Has left a lot of corpses in his wake. I mean, we can count the bodies as part of the, quote, MAGA drive to take over Maricopa County. And the headline refers to it as an impending bloodbath. Columnist Charles Blow has a new piece for the New York Times entitled A Biden Bloodbath.
2018 midterms, you can bet that they 100% are fearing a slaughter. In fact, the word bloodbath and massacre come up frequently.
The Republican Party will be destroyed. It's going to be a bloodbath.
There's going to be a bloodbath one way or the other.
Bloodbath
for Bernie Sanders.
It's been a bloodbath. They're shaping up to be a bloodbath.
Head off a bloodbath in next year's crucial midterm.
Off-year elections are often a bloodbath.
This week's bloodbath for Democrats, a bloodbath at the ballot box.
There could be a Republican bloodbath.
They'll talk about a bloodbath.
It's a bloodbath.
Okay, I actually had to stop it because it goes on like forever. So like clearly everyone in the world can use this term when it comes to politics, except for Trump. And it's like, these are just a fraction of the examples of them just continually smearing him nonstop for years. And if they're willing to lie about stupid things like this, then what else are they lying about? It's totally swaying people's opinions.
Yeah, and they're also focusing on his comment about, illegal immigrants aren't people. When he wasn't saying that, he was talking about fucking criminals. Like,
MS-13, again.
yes, Exactly. And it's like all you see are these headlines in the news. Trump thinks migrants aren't people. So it's very, very clear the left leaning way that the media portrays what's going on. And it's like the same time right now, we have the Supreme Court handling these cases this week related to the Biden admin's censorship of social media during COVID. And even RFK Jr. has a lawsuit against the federal government because they censored him for spreading misinformation about the vaccine back in 2021. And I think the two major cases involve Louisiana and Missouri, alleging that the Biden admin, the CDC, and the DHS illegally pressured social media companies to censor and like flag or removed COVID misinformation. And these came about a while ago. They've just been like ongoing. And they also involve issues related to election fraud, the Hunter Biden laptop story. But the point is, these are huge landmark cases, and they're going to decide whether or not the federal government has the right to censor free speech. And from what I read in the New York Post, it's not looking good because you have the three most liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, who are in favor. And then you have the three most conservative justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, who are against government censorship. So that's 3-on-3, and it's a tie. But then we have John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, and they are apparently the wild cards. So their votes are going to be the deciding factor. And I was reading an article in Business Insider that said they're not even expecting the Supreme Court to make a decision on these cases until June or July. And so the result and the repercussions for Americans is going to be fucking huge if they rule in favor of government censorship and say that what the Biden admin did is okay. And Stephanie, like, how convenient coincidence that these court decisions are all going to take place in June or July, which coincides with predictions of mass chaos and civil unrest during the summer.
Yeah. You know what else is a coincidence? The 3 wild card judges are the ones that have been threatened, where people have literally showed up at their house saying they're going to kill them, and the government did nothing to protect them. Like, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And I guarantee this summer, we'll see it again. We'll see it again. They will threaten them, which is against the law, but they'll get away with it because they always do. And yeah, I mean, I think that so many people take for granted the life that we have here in America because they've never had any adversity. They've never dealt with like a totalitarian government, a dictatorship. And so they don't realize like how important it is to preserve our freedom of speech and not allow censorship. And oh man, I mean, a lot of people have woke up. I just hope it's enough to make this correction because I feel like our reality like depends on this election. It's going to make us or break us.
100%.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys could go to the MRC website and look up this report if you want to like get all the details, because there's a lot there. There's a ton of evidence that Google was completely participating in election interference. It's crazy. And of course, there's probably not going to be any accountability for it, but we're going to report it nonetheless. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here Monday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.